Welcome to the Science of CX podcast. My name is Steve Pappas, a former serial entrepreneur turned CX obsessed expert. And each week we bring you an inspiring message and insight into how customer experience can catapult your business to soar, grow, and accelerate beyond what you thought was possible. We seek out experts to interview and help you on your journey to CX in the science of CX. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Science of CX. As you heard, I'm Steve Pappas, your host, and we're trying to bring some interesting aspects of CX every single episode, and I hope you're understanding what we're setting out to do. We are trying to develop the proverbial mini MBA in CX through this entire season. And there's over 40 episodes in this season. And if you go through all of them, you will have gotten a flavor of CX from all aspects of the CX continuum. And we try to bring you guests, experts, consultants, technology people, and brands that can speak to a wide variety of CX. So hopefully you get a chance through your day, while you're gardening, while you're maybe in the car, not that most of us are in the car that much, but you get a chance to listen to more of the episodes, and hopefully you walk away with a few nuggets. Today we have another guest on. Today we have Brandon Tidd. And Brandon, we're going to start talking about the small businesses and CX, which is definitely a passion of mine. So I want to welcome you to the show and thank you for coming on today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Steve.
It's our pleasure. So, Brandon, maybe we can start off with, I'll give you a little bit of a bio for Brandon, and you could correct me if I'm going off track at all here. But Brandon is a champion of small business, and he really is, right? He spent nearly his entire career in the advertising space. So he really knows how to match the product with the customer. And he's leveraged the tools of his trade to connect companies he cares about and brands that he cares about with an audience in need. And he's been doing that to drive CX for SMBs in contact and service centers all over. Brandon currently lives in his hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, with his wife and 3-year-old daughter. So now that you've got a sense of Brandon, I'm going to throw a curveball. Brandon, I heard through a little bird that an occurrence at SeaWorld actually began to color your career path. I'm sure our listeners want to hear how SeaWorld actually did this because I want to hear about it. Can you tell us?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So when I was a kid, we went to SeaWorld. We had SeaWorld here in Cleveland and we went religiously. We were season pass holders. We went there every weekend. And back in the days when radio was cool and broadcasting live, they would broadcast live every Saturday night from SeaWorld. And I would just go and stare at that DJ in awe, watch him sit there and stand in the middle of SeaWorld right next to Shamu Stadium and talk to the entire city of Cleveland. And I said, that is what I wanted to do. And I was maybe 10 at the time, but I stuck with it and actually got a degree in broadcasting. And so it really, one thing led to another after that.
Wow. I can't begin to tell you some of the parallels. Obviously, you could tell by what I do that I'm very shy and I really, don't like talking at all. But which nobody will believe. But I remember my days in radio too, and I had a radio show for years, and I also voiced the narration for a couple of TV shows that were syndicated around New England, and I'll tell you, it is such a charge. So I know exactly what you mean, and it's really funny because my son, going through college, he also worked at the college radio station through his years there too. So there must be something that we just passed down through the generations, but advertising has always fascinated me. And it's not an area that I've really worked in, aside from selling my own ads to the TV and radio programs that I've had. But, how does advertising figure into customer experience? What did you learn from advertising to, help you provide a better experience for your customers?
Yeah, so there are so many parallels with advertising and CX, because really advertising and sales is all just customized CX, right? So we're all trying to solve a problem, whether it's a problem with a product that you're selling or a solution that you're providing. Everyone is out there just trying to solve a problem for somebody else. And so when I fell into sales, and I say I fell into sales because I actually wanted to be on the microphone. I wanted to be on the broadcasting side of things. But when I called the radio station after I graduated, I said, "Hey, I have a degree. I need a job." And they said, "Well, we don't have any jobs. Sorry." I said, but I have a degree. I need money. I just got this very expensive college degree. Can you please give me a job? And they said, no. But I kept calling. And they said, after a while, they said, "You know what? You're really persistent. You should go into sales." And so that's where I got my first inroads into sales. But then the more I discovered about the industry and the career, the more I fell in love with the nuances of how much it really is there to help others.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me that, how many of us actually get the exact job for the degree that we went for. I mean, I know I didn't. I had an MIS degree, so I was more on the information systems side. I could program, and I programmed for the Air Force for 4 years, and that's not what I do. I mean, I've been running companies, starting companies, and driving the customer-centric experience for 35 plus years. So, many of us don't end up in exactly that. But it's kind of funny because I think every guest that we have on, we always ask them, how do you get to CX? Right? How did you get here? And we all have different paths. We all have different motivators, different triggers that moved us more towards the customer than to the product or the service, et cetera. So it's interesting. But you tend to focus on the small businesses, right? The small, medium-sized business, the SMBs. Can you tell us a little more about that? Why is your passion to the smaller? Is it smaller and local?
Yeah, I would say smaller and local is where my passion lies. It stems from getting to know the businesses back when I was selling radio and getting to know the business owners and hearing their stories and really getting an understanding of what it is that they were trying to give back to the community. They were providing local jobs. They were boosting the local economy. And really, it was all about helping them find more customers and signal boosting their stories to get more people to buy their products and services. So in all my entire career, no matter what I was selling, be it digital products or radio ads, I never saw my product as a product. I saw it as a solution to a problem that they had to get more customers in. And so by providing them with what I considered to be, at the time, stellar customer service, which I now kind of looking back on it through a reflective lens, realized that I was providing them a good customer experience, that they stuck with me, they were loyal to me, and we were able to do great things in terms of impacting their business in a positive way, using the tools of our trade to help them deliver a better customer experience to a broader audience.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess CX for you is not only customer experience, but it's community experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about what does the solution look like. So you develop the CX for clients, for the SMBs, but what does the solution look like? What is your approach? And generally, we're, as we say, the CX bleeding head wounds, right? What are the bleeding head wounds that they call you for and say, "Hey, Brandon, we need help"? How do they recognize they need help? And how do they tell you what it is that they think they need? Not that that's always what happens in the end, but take us through maybe that early part of the interaction with how do how do you think they recognize it? What are the issues, and what does that first step look like?
Sure. And so it's very generous of you to say that they recognize that they have a problem, because so many times there's a huge glaring blind spot in their world, because, and not to their detriment. It's not that they're not paying attention. It's just that they're too close to the trees to see the forest, right? So one thing I love to do before I ever try to sell anybody anything is walk in and see what the experience is like as a consumer. And I encourage owners and small business owners and managers to do the same thing, is to be the customer. Walk in, try to order something on your website, try to call and ask a question, be undercover boss kind of normalized this, or at least put a spotlight on it on TV. But really, truly, there's so much of a disconnect between the people who are often making the CX decisions and the people who are impacted by them. And so one thing I love to do is get into the store, get into the restaurant, and be the customer first. So when we start a conversation, we have a jumping off point of either, here are the things that I see that you're doing really well. Here are some of the areas that I see that are opportunities for improvement, or where you might be missing customers or might be turning customers off. And that sparks a larger conversation to really discover what they're trying to do. And if it is a problem, by definition, the sales is trying to find a need and fill it. And so if there's no problem, if they don't have a problem with the way their business is being run, I could be the best salesman in the world. If I have any ethics about me, I'm not going to be able to sell them anything, because they don't have a problem for me to solve.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I agree with you that especially many of them don't necessarily recognize the problem for what it is. They may recognize it for the symptoms that they see. And we always talk about here on the show. We always talk about that. It's better if they recognize it, or their employees recognize it and bring it up. It's really tough when the consumer recognizes it. So hopefully it doesn't get to that point. So what might a solution look like? Because we're kind of getting into what our listeners that are small, medium-sized businesses, could start to think about. But what does the solution look like once you do this analysis of being the customer and walking in the customer's shoes and starting to determine these gaps here for them? But what does the solution look like? How do you describe what the deliverable at the end of the day is?
Yeah. And so it's going to be different for every customer, obviously. No two businesses are going to have the same pain or the exact same situation, but painting with a broad stroke, the things that I like to look at are, are you doing enough to get your name out there? Are you doing promotion and advertising? You could have the best restaurant in the world, but if nobody eats your food and nobody talks about it and you don't tell anybody about it, do you have a strong social media presence? Are you actively engaging your customers on social channels, not only Facebook and Twitter, but also Instagram and Snapchat and some of the more modern technology where your next generation of customers are coming from? And a lot of times when we start down that road, I hear one of the pieces of pushback that I hear frequently is, well, I don't have time for that. I have a business to run. And so, it's always a trade-off. You've got one hand on the keyboard or the other hand on the stove, or, on the customer list. And so what we look at is, where are there opportunities for you to delegate that responsibility? Can you hire a college intern that knows Snapchat and Instagram really well to go get a new audience for you? Or can you partner with a company like Zendesk, which to me is kind of the gold standard of customer experience right now, from a customer service platform and contact center, and channel all of your communications through one system, opposed to having a phone that rings over here and an email address that's tied to your computer that's in the basement. And I just lost power here, so I don't know if we're still live.
Yep, we're good.
Gotta love those storms coming through, those spring storms. So
no problem.
I'm just going to rewind just a little bit so we can clip that for your editors.
Actually, let me take a quick break too while we're doing it. So we'll take a quick break and get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
Panviva has 25 years of empowering customer service, and we have deep expertise in how people actually use information, from our roots in learning and performance. We offer accurate, consistent information on demand to every channel, most relevant knowledge at your people's exact moment of need, integrated, streamlined internal processes, systems that deliver memorable and remarkable customer experiences that boost customer attention and loyalty every time, and knowledge that extends across your entire digital landscape. To learn more, visit Panviva at www.panviva.com.
And we're back talking with Brandon Tidd. So let's continue on that path of what the solution looks like, Brandon.
Yeah. So, we're talking about how whether they need to hire a college intern to help them, or, put a member of their staff that is a subject matter expert in those channels, in charge of those channels, and delegate that responsibility, or whether it's about bringing in a third-party vendor like a Zendesk to help navigate those channels and to consolidate those channels into one unified customer experience. At the end of the day, our goal is to bring everybody together into one conversation so you can stay in front of the conversation. So you're not blindsided by a 1-star Yelp review or somebody who is trolling you on Facebook and dragging your brand through the mud. The best defense is a good offense when it comes to customer experience. And, we say you can't bury your head in the sand when it comes to problems, because the world is just too connected now. And if you have a bad customer experience with somebody, you've got to be proactive in fixing it and addressing it, because they will certainly be proactive in sharing that experience with everybody that on the internet.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. So I guess since we've talked about a lot of different aspects here, let's talk a little bit about the intersection of where sales and marketing and CX really live.
Yeah. So I think that there's a really fine point where they all connect wonderfully, and that's at the customer, right? And so whether the customer is, in my case, the customer was that small business owner, or in their case, their customer, everything funnels towards that point where if you are trying to sell a product, you're selling a customer experience, and everybody has a preference that's based on their own perceptions of that experience. So, the old adage is Coke versus Pepsi. Everyone has an opinion, but nobody can really pinpoint why. For some, it's the taste. For some, it's the price. For some, it's the color of the logo. Everybody has a different inroad. And that's one thing that I found that's just fascinating to me in psychology, is that your motivation for engaging with a product. We're seeing a lot of brand activism right now in this time frame where, I think we're in a unique position in history where we actually care about what the people who sell us the product care about, right? Like that's never happened before, at least not at this level in history, where brands have developed a social conscience. And so that becomes a motivating factor in part of the customer experience. It's part of that customer's journey and part of their decision-making process. And so I think what we've seen is, because of world events, things that were already happening in the space of customer experience have started to accelerate. And it has forced some people who were more traditional, who relied on maybe a more mature clientele, to really step up their game, or decide that this was their exit. This was the point where they decide, I'm not going to play this game anymore. I've had a good run. I'm stepping aside. But for those that are coming into business or wanting to grow their business, it is absolutely essential that they pivot and lean in towards the customer experience, because even if you're on the right track, you get run over if you don't keep moving.
Exactly. Well, maybe we could talk about, you've authored a book, and the book is called Simply Digital, a jargon-free small business survival guide to the digital world. I found it fascinating, because when you say jargon-free, you really meant it. As I went through your book, it was a no nonsense, no fluff guide to how to get from A to Z for a small business. It really seems to be a great are, something great ammunition in the arsenal of the small business owner or proprietor or solopreneur. And you've got a great 25 action step review towards the end of it. But, what made you want to write the book? What was the impetus for this?
Yeah. So, and thank you for talking about it, because it is a passion project for me. It was really something that I came to realize that anybody at this point who's had a digital experience, which at this point is virtually everybody, has had a bad customer experience in digital. And that's not necessarily a knock on the companies that are selling it. There's just so much misinformation, and it is an ever-evolving, rapidly moving target to hit. So I'm actually surprised that, and I was thinking about when I was writing that book, how long what is the shelf life? What is the expiration date on this material before the content is no longer relevant, because the digital space moves so quickly. But I think for anybody who's going into business or wants to start a business and maybe has pivoted their career because they've been forced to with everything that's going on in the world, this is a great primer for the businesses to get a better understanding of where to start. What's the foundation? And no matter what flashy new apps come into the marketplace or whatever new trend is online and hashtags and whatnot, what you're seeing is everybody's got to have that foundation. You've got to establish that baseline credibility on the internet, and this book helps you do that.
That's great. That's great. Well, I like the fact that you end your 25 points with have fun. And it's what it's all about. I mean, for those of us that have started businesses, and I had 6 startups, and I tell people a lot, my last one was a charter airline. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did it anyway, because I was always a gambler when it came to startups. And I always did things that people said you can't do. And that just fueled me on. But in every one of them, I always went into it with the same idea, is to have fun with it. And if you don't have fun with the business, and it just becomes work, we all want to work hard for our business, but you don't want to hate it. You really do want to have fun. So I think, just to bring it home a little bit to the customer, we've talked a lot about customer, and we've talked about culture, and in small businesses, let me just ask you kind of a off-the-cuff question. Do you find that most small business owners are more customer-centric than folks in the big business when it's not really theirs?
So that's a challenging question, because everybody that's in business is in business to please their customers, right? Like from the CEOs down to the small business owners, everybody has that singular goal of improving the customer experience. I think that we have a little bit more leeway when it comes to the local businesses, and maybe what attracted me to working with small businesses, because they're not beholden. It's their business, it's their baby, and they have the authority to run it the way they see fit, for better or worse. I mean, it's not always a great customer experience. And, I've certainly been on the wrong side of that statement several times when it came to working with customers who had an opinion and didn't necessarily put the customer first. But by and large, I think that the local small business owners really have a passion for supporting the people in their local community and are working tirelessly on the front lines every day. So they're in there, they're talking to the customers. They know the pulse of what's going on in their world. And I think it gets harder to do that as you scale. And at some point you kind of lose focus because your priorities are on bigger things, and you're making a more positive impact in the world, but it's really hard to stay with your nose that close to the grindstone when you're operating in a C-suite or an executive level capacity. But I think even then, there's still an opportunity to provide good CX. And my favorite, and it kind of goes back to the have fun aspect of this, my all-time, hands down, it'll be hard to top favorite CX customer experience story is overseas. It's out of the Virgin Train Group. So Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Trains, had a passenger that was on a train, a long distance train ride, and they were rocketing through, I forgot where, it was somewhere overseas. And they stopped to use the bathroom, and the particular stall that they had chosen was out of toilet paper, and they realized that a little bit too late. So being, the 21st century connected world that we live in, what do they do with this situation? They send a tweet to Virgin Trains official Twitter account and say, "Help, I'm out of toilet paper." Mostly as a joke, probably. But some social media manager was on their A game that day, because they picked up the tweet, they got an alert, they responded back, they said, "What train, what car?" And they responded back, and they had a little brief interaction. And at the next stop, somebody ran and delivered toilet paper to that stall for them, one of the train employees. So when we talk about delivering a good customer experience, Steve, that is the bar to deliver.
That's the ultimate. That's the ultimate. So I think the moral to the story is, not only do the small businesses have a vested interest in providing the best customer experience, but even the big businesses still have that same need and the same desire. It just may have to go through some layers, or maybe those companies empower their employees, as the owner of a small business is empowered to make something right and turn every situation around so it's a more positive experience for the customer.
That's exactly right.
Perfect. Well, Brandon, I think that's all the time we have today. I really want to thank you. Let me tell people how they can get in touch with you. If you guys are on Twitter, you could find Brandon at Brandon, Brandon, Tidd, Tidd. And you can also find him on his website, brandontidd.com. And also check out his book on Amazon, Simply Digital, Jargon-Free Business Survival. Brandon, I want to thank you very much, because a lot of times we don't get a chance to make sure that we talk SMBs and CX, and you gave us a refreshing aspect of how to think about the entrepreneurs that are out there, especially today. They're probably struggling a bit. They've probably had some issues with the pandemic going on, and we really need to think about how to support them more and support local businesses to make sure that they're there for us, and they want to be there to help us. Does that sum it up?
Yeah, and I'm just in my head thinking about the proximity of that story about Twitter, with handing out my Twitter handle. Somebody's going to ask me for toilet paper on Twitter now. I just know it. But I really, support local businesses. They need our help now more than ever. They're just really struggling and really trying to make ends meet. And, I will continue to fight the good fight to try to help them elevate their message with whatever platform I have at my disposal.
This is great, Brandon. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be here. Love the show.
Thanks. And that's it for the Science of CX. I'm Steve Pappas. I hope everyone's... You've been listening to the Science of CX. My name is Steve Pappas. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have, the highest compliment that you can give us is to subscribe, rate, and review the Science of CX. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next episode.